Yo, yo, yo! I just finished watching Friday Night SmackDown. Hell yeah, it was a cool little show. Anyways, we're about to get into it. Let's go.
I'll just do what you do. Kakarot!
There was a ton of cut content in Dragon Ball GT, which we sadly never got to see. GT is controversial, but its impact is still felt today in modern Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball Daima, for example, was hugely inspired by GT, so it looks like its influence isn't going anywhere. Still, the product we got was very different from what the production staff had in mind when they began working on it. There were a myriad of episodes that had to be cut, ideas shelved, and transformations never seen due to circumstances, as the series would only last 64 episodes. Many of the lost ideas have been revealed through interviews, in particular with Kozo Morishita, the producer of Dragon Ball GT. The original idea for the anime original sequel was actually more in line with what Dragon Ball Super would eventually become, a story set during the 10 years in between the end of the Majin Buu arc and Goku leaving with Oob. Instead of it being focused on Goku, however, it would have been more of anime original stories, focused on the next generation of fighters, Goten, Trunks, Pan, etc. However, this pitch was rejected, and even seen as disrespectful to have a story not separate from the original manga. So, with Toriyama's input, they decided to set this story after the events of the original manga. Still, the focus was going to be on the next generation, but as talks went along, Goku was seen as the heart and soul of Dragon Ball. So, how do you intertwine the two? Well, you make Goku a child as well. That, and making him a kid, gave them an excuse to limit Goku's power. As the story developed, it was decided to focus more and more on Goku, and the setting of space was chosen since they could have anything happen up there, with Morishita saying that they could have continued stories for 10 or 20 years. But enough about what GT could have been. What about the stories they had to shelf once they were already in production? One major idea that seems obvious is having Pan turn into a Super Saiyan. The idea was floated about, but never fully developed. In particular, Morishita points to the episode where Pan was turned into a doll, which would have been ideal for her to become a Super Saiyan, and that she might have done just that if the episode happened later down the line. As it is now in the series, the episode sets a pattern of Pan causing trouble, Goku having to rescue her and fix things, a pattern that they didn't want to break early on. The Dragon Ball GT Perfect Files, a pair of books with extra information, also teases this idea by saying that Pan has inherited Saiyan blood and possesses high fighting power. If the conditions are just right, even Pan and Vegeta's daughter Bra should be able to transform into Super Saiyan. When the worst crisis strikes, the first female Super Saiyan in history may emerge. The Perfect Files have some interesting information not shown in the actual anime. For example, it's one of the first instances where it's mentioned that Planet Vegeta was not the Saiyans' home world, and that instead belonged to the Tuffles. This idea comes from a different Tuffle story, Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans, where the Saiyans are seen crashing down on Planet Plant after chaos in their home world. Of course, this idea was explored much later in Dragon Ball Super in the form of Planet Sadala. The book also mentions that there's a theory that the original form of the Saiyans could have been the Great Ape, and they evolved from it. Of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that this was information planned for the anime itself, but they did think these things through, and just so happened to not include it in the actual story. So I thought it was worth mentioning. The team made a total of 26 episode outlines, but when they finished writing episode 3, they realized that the space traveling episodes weren't really that interesting. So they switched gears to have the story refocus on Earth being in trouble, thus the baby arc. From those 26 episode outlines, some would be produced, but many would be completely scrapped. We only really know about one in particular, a story about a team landing on a planet full of prisoners. It's funny to hear this now since we've gotten similar ideas in the Moro arc. Although many episodes went unproduced, Morishita does mention that simple episode ideas were handed over to Toriyama so he could create some artwork for the team as inspiration. Because of this, we get a sense of what some of these episodes consisted of by looking at Toriyama's art. Two of these, the team in a giant world and a desert planet, did make it into the final story. But the third piece, one of Goku, Pan, and Trunks fighting grotesque aliens, never really happens. Trunks never uses a gun, Pan never has this jean jacket, and they never go to a planet like this. At least not in this way. Their character design is instead used in the very last episode, as a hellish monster that Piccolo is fighting. Although we do see them much later on in Dragon Ball Super, Toyotaro is a pretty hardcore fan of Dragon Ball, so he reused these designs as aliens defeated by Moro's goons during the Galactic Prisoner Saga. So this could possibly be an unproduced episode. Toriyama also made character designs for the main cast, and although most of them ended up intact in the final product, Krillin looks completely different from his anime counterpart, so it could belong to scrapped ideas. Or maybe the anime staff just didn't like the design, which I kinda get.
I didn't like that.
Maak je klaar voor de lente met de Amazon Lente Deals.
Speaking of design changes, perhaps the most iconic part of Dragon Ball GT was Super Saiyan 4. The form exploded back into popularity thanks to its new version in Dragon Ball Daima, which was more than likely designed by Toriyama. However, the original version of the form was created by Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, who worked as an animation supervisor. Designing Super Saiyan 4 was a huge undertaking, so he decided to go on a very different and radical position compared to what came before. The result was the original black hair design of Super Saiyan 4. The only changes really was the addition of fur at the bottom of his chest. This was the only design ever made for the form, but before settling on the iconic crimson fur, they played around quite a bit with the colors. Nakatsuru explains that he did try different ideas, such as a golden Super Saiyan 4, something that's basically become part of fan culture at this point. The first ever look we got at the form was on December 1996, a whole month before it appeared in the anime, as shown in the Cardaz magazine. His colors were completely different there, having gray fur instead of red. One transformation design we do know was harder to figure out was Vegeta's Super Saiyan 4. At the Made in Asia convention in 2018, Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru revealed the original design sheets for Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta. Rather than having that almost mullet-like long hair on the back, Vegeta would have instead gotten something of a longer, more radical version of his regular hairstyle from Z. If anything, this is more similar to the Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta design from Dragon Ball Daima, making something of a star shape on the back, while growing upwards and falling back down slightly. This is a neat design, but I'm glad they decided to go on a different direction, because I love what Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta's hair looked like in the end. Also, although not entirely related to Dragon Ball GT, in Dragon Ball Heroes, Goku and Vegeta unlock Super Saiyan 4 Limit Breaker, an evolution of Super Saiyan 4. The final design has glowing red hair and a pink tint to the skin, but they could have looked completely different. The team tried out many different versions, one that looks fairly similar with the red hair, another that's much more like a humanoid Ozaru, and they even went back to the idea of a golden Super Saiyan 4. Anyways, back to GT. Once the anime staff moved to the Super 17 saga, they knew that they didn't have much time left. So sadly, one of the more interesting character arcs had to be cut because of this. Gohan was largely sidelined in GT. He had stopped being a fighter to focus on being a scholar instead, but took on the mantle of a fighter again once the gates of hell opened on Earth. This transition was originally planned to be 1 or 2 episodes, focusing on Gohan regaining his fighting spirit and becoming a warrior once more. Atsushi Maekawa, writer of a majority of Dragon Ball GT episodes, explained how he wanted to explore this story on why someone who had given up being a fighter altogether would be forced to take on that role again. Videl would have gotten hurt. And in the depths of despair, Gohan would open up his wardrobe and find his old gi, saying to himself, "To think there come a day where I'd wear this again." It's not clear if this was the orange or the purple gi, but seeing how he wears the turtle gi in the show, it was more than likely that one. Maekawa went as far as to write out the story, but it was decided that it diverged too much from the main plot. The most Gohan did to signify this change was, quote-unquote, he takes off his glasses and takes on the eyes of a warrior. If this story had been developed, we would have likely seen Gohan more active in the Shadow Dragons arc as well. He also added that Piccolo wasn't in the show because Goku was the entire focus, but if they had gone forward with the story focusing on Gohan, then Piccolo would have appeared more. Another subplot that would have been resolved if they had a little bit more time was Android 17. Maekawa received a bunch of fan letters from people complaining how cruel it was to kill 17 off forever, but that wasn't the original plan. At the end of the story, when everyone is returned to life, Android 17 was supposed to come back to life as well. The scene made it as far as having dialogue, but was cut due to time. Interestingly, one of the few things the team had planned from the very start was the ending, where Goku leaves with Shenron and the audience is left wondering if Goku really did pass on. The fact that they knew where they wanted to end also allowed them to make the Goku Jr. special way before the series ended. It's kinda weird, but the special aired after the baby arc, instead of following the Shadow Dragons, which you would think is the logical thing to do. So maybe they had more ideas for Goku Jr., which never materialized. This is also just speculation, but GT did have another story outside of the anime, which points to other ideas that may have gone unused. A Dragon Ball GT stage play where Don Key returns with an army of Legics to get revenge on Goku was shown in Sendai, Japan. In it, Frieza and Cell also return with brand new transformations, though a chunk of the show is lost media. This is a very niche and very weird part of Dragon Ball history. It's clear that Dragon Ball GT was a challenge for the crew, making a wholly original story with little input from the original author, and tasked with following up one of the most legendary anime runs of all time must have been an extremely arduous task. It may not be for everyone, and they may not have gotten to do everything they wanted to do, but the legacy of Dragon Ball GT continues, despite us likely never visiting that side of Dragon Ball again. I hope you enjoyed this look behind the scenes. Be sure to help flash that subscribe button, and if you're looking for more Dragon Ball content, then be sure to check out my video on every
Nah, we'll be alright.